Hey, everybody. Today for you, podcast number 84. Today's podcast is titled VO2 Max and Everything Longevity with Dr. G. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of your weekly Limitless Life Network podcast. I'm Dr. Pete Lombardi, and today we have a very special guest, Dr. Stephen Geanopulos, or better referred to as Dr. G. And I know this is an unusual session of this podcast, having somebody on here to be interviewed and doing it via the internet, but we're really graced with the presence of somebody that is an expert in a lot of things, from neurology, chiropractic, functional medicine, and longevity. Dr. Stephen Geanopulos is not only a friend of mine, but he's somebody that I have basically enrolled as my own family doctor for several years now. And we're just honored to have him on the show. So, but I always start off before I really get into the speakers, thanking you, the listener, for taking time out of your day to be a loyal follower and subscriber to the podcast. So like, follow, share with all your friends and family. And I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Love your comments. Love your feedback. My wife and I are very blessed to have you as listeners. So on with the show today. Welcome, Dr. G. How's it going?
Excellent.
Excellent.
So, usual.
Oh, yeah. So you're not a stranger to the podcast, that's for sure. You've been on a couple of other times, and we've done some great content about blood chemistry in the past. But today, we're actually going to talk about something that is really kind of new on my radar. I've heard of it before, but I've never actually had this test done on me. But we're talking about VO2 Max. So for those people that are listening that have no idea what this is about, could you just start off with the basics of what the heck is this?
Yeah, this kind of technology has different names. There's cardiorespiratory, testing. There's cardiometabolic testing. There's VO2 Max, resting. Your resting metabolic rate. There's different ways to look at this kind of test, and it's really a tried and true kind of technology. It's been around since the 1920s, where
really?
we analyze how your body takes in oxygen and releases CO2, and it sounds pretty interesting, like just a breathing test. But the amount of information that's gathered through this process is staggering, and the information that we can learn from it, and we've been learning from this kind of technology for decades, really. So it's a very tried and true type of assessment of your health.
Okay, so that was actually one of the questions I was going to ask you, was how accurate is this test? But basically that answers that one right off the bat, that it's a very accurate test, that it's tried and true, and it's been around for a long time. Would you say that technology has improved the amount of data that we can analyze from it?
Well, what's interesting is that this technology has been used almost exclusively for decades in the realm of elite athletics. Right?
Okay.
By understanding somebody's volume of oxygen maximum that they can take in, use, and how much CO2 they can expel, we could make predictions about their ability to improve. We can make predictions about their ability to run fast and for how long. And so it really was in the realm of elite athletics. And the researchers were the ones who were gathering this data in a laboratory setting. Again, usually at a university. This isn't really something that your medical doctor or your cardiologist would be incorporating into their practice. Yet the information from this data allows the American Heart Association to make all kinds of recommendations based on this type of testing. So the American Heart Association takes this very, very seriously. And there's a lot of new information now, because this data was so difficult to put together and to translate, Now that we have software, we've kind of democratized it. So 20 years ago, if you wanted this kind of equipment, you would need about, almost $100,000 worth of equipment on a big cart in a clinical setting or a university setting. Now, as you saw this past weekend, we have it in a 1-pound device you wear on your back and a mask that you wear on your face. And now it's, far, far less expensive, and we have so much access to the data and what it means.
Okay. So it's measuring basically how well you can exchange gas, basically the oxygen and CO2.
Yes. So, but let me just take that so that it goes in through your lungs. From your lungs, it goes onto into your blood. From your blood, it goes onto your blood cells. From your blood cells, it gets delivered to your cells. Your cells have to use it. They have to exchange another gas called CO2 and then return it back. So we're looking at your heart, your lungs, your red blood cells, your ability to, we're looking at your actual muscle cells' ability to use that energy. So there's a wealth of information going from what
so it's
goes
really
in to what goes out.
Yeah, it's kind of like the traveling of oxygen from the time you suck it in to the time that you spit it back out or exhale it back out as carbon dioxide. And what happens to that oxygen along the way in that pathway of traveling from your lungs through your blood, through your cells and mitochondria and back. Yeah.
And anything that would be considered poor health can be manifest as a challenge or a problem on this test. So for example, even if you had, arthritic knees, that's going to, affect the test. If you're a smoker, that's going to affect the test. If you have any limitations in your cardiovascular, that's going to affect the test. So this is a test that it really looks at every system you have in your body, your ability to use energy, carbohydrates, fats, which is going to be impacted by your digestive system. So you really can draw lots of conclusions when somebody is functioning at a high level. You can say a lot about virtually every single system they have in their body. Whereas if somebody does have a choke point, like something that's restricting their health, whether it be physical or biochemical or digestive, then that's going to negatively impact your results.
I never really thought of that until you just said that now, that no matter, how great you think something is working, this is kind of a great test that looks at how well everything works together, because you're performing an exercise, and that exercise is a full body exercise, whether it's running, whether it's rowing, as we did, most of us did rowing. It could be done on a bike, right? Or like an Airdyne type of bike. You probably can't do it swimming, obviously.
Well, in universities, they have a technology that they actually use for swimmers.
Okay, so the device we wore was not one of those.
Definitely not.
It didn't look like it would have done too well underwater. But the point is that, it is really a great test to look at how we do life. How the expression of life is meant to be lived in a moving environment, not just sitting still in a lab, right? Like when you go to the doctor and they check your blood pressure, you're just sitting in a chair and your blood pressure obviously fluctuates all day long. It's not a functional analysis. It's a moment in time. Or snapping an x-ray, taking a picture of an x-ray of somebody's spine. It's a moment in time. It's not actually functionally in motion. So.
Correct, and it's not something you can quickly improve. Like you could quickly improve your blood sugar. You could quickly improve your vitamin D levels. You could quickly improve your cholesterol. Those are all markers that people use as a measure of health, and they have their place, certainly. But, if I know I'm going for a blood test in 2 weeks and I just start taking my vitamin D, or go on a low carbohydrate diet, I can improve a lot of markers in the short term.
Right.
Is that really a reflection of who I am? Not really.
No.
But this kind of test can't be fooled, because it's really a reflection of who you have been for quite some time. You're not going to have short-term gains just by knowing you're going to have the test done. Oh, I better start working out this month. in
So
order to
if I
achieve.
did yoga right before and got really limber, it wouldn't really make a big difference, right? You can't cheat the
Correct.
test. You
You
can't cheat
cannot
it.
cheat the test.
You can't game the system, so to speak. It's
Correct.
such a great test in that regard. So super cool. I certainly enjoyed the process, and I know everybody that went through it really liked it too. One of the things that I really liked about it was, and it hurt a little bit too, because we're in our 50s now, right?
Hmm.
And it just made me realize my true mortality, that we all, everybody knows that there is an end to this life, right? And we know that there's, but in the time that you have left on this planet, what are you going to do with it? And right now I think I've set myself up in a good situation for years to come, and you can talk about some of the results, but it was an idea that, what, my heart rate will never get, any more. I mean, we tried to drive my heart rate up higher and higher, and I just couldn't get my heart to beat any faster. I mean, I really tried. I gave it my all, but I just couldn't get it to beat any faster. And so my maximum heart rate is not what it once was. I know that back in my 30s, my maximum heart rate was higher. So, because I know it revved at a lot higher level. So, yeah.
That's right, and we can predict our decline. The way I like to look at it is when you watch a video on YouTube and you kind of want to get through it quickly, so you put it on 1.5 or 1.75, so you can hear the person speaking faster. You get the information. It just sounds really sped up.
Right.
Well, most people age that way, right? And they're living their life at 1.25, 1.5, 1.75, and I believe the word longevity is kind of like a word has different meanings to different people. To me, it just means how close to 1.0 or maybe even 0.95, are you living your life where you're aging more slowly, right? There's no fighting the clock, like you said. You are one of the fittest 54-year-olds, 53-year-olds I've ever known, and there's no breaking that barrier of what your maximum heart rate is. You're not going to train it. It's just not going to go higher, like you said. And with this test, VO2 Max, we can predict. We could say that once you hit your fourth decade, once you hit 30 years old, there'll be a decline of about 10% per decade in the average person. But we also know that decline can reduce to 3, 4, 5% per decade if you plan for it, if you train
Right.
for it, and therefore you're aging more closely to that 1.0 speed.
Nice. Yeah, that was super valuable. Just learning that. So, how does somebody improve their VO2 max? How do they go about doing that?
Well, it's good to think about your VO2 max as a pyramid, and the space inside of the pyramid is your volume of oxygen, right? It's how much you can process. So you can improve that volume by making the pyramid taller. You can improve it by making the base wider, and you'd like to do both. You'd like to
Okay.
raise the peak and have a wide base rather than having a high peak with a narrow base. And this is a great analogy because the base of the pyramid is what we call low intensity, long duration exercise, right? Some people call it zone 2. If there's a 5-zone exercise, system where zone 1 is kind of like walking the dog and doing yoga, zone 2 is where you're giving more effort, you're raising your heart rate. But if you and I were doing a zone 2 exercise together, let's say we're on a treadmill in zone 2, we can carry a conversation. You could hear that it's labored breathing. If anybody were listening to us, it wouldn't sound like we're having a great conversation. It would be labored breathing. We'd be sweating, but we can certainly carry the conversation. Zone 3, you can't carry the conversation. So that's the base. And then the peak of the pyramid is raised by doing very high intensity types of exercises. So, running a sprint. Usually it's what you can maximally maintain for between 2 to 4 minutes. That would be VO2 Max kind of training, and you could raise the peak of that pyramid by doing that. And if you were to do, let's say, 3 sets of those, 4 sets of those, or even 5. So let's just imagine you're going to go on your high school track, run full speed, meaning get your heart rate as high as it can go. You know, I figure 400 to 800 meters would be a good sprint, and then you take the same amount of time to cool off, you know, just kind of walk, and then do it again, and probably do that 3 to 5 times. That would be a good way to raise the peak of the pyramid. But I would probably only want to do that once a week, whereas the zone 2, the base, the long duration, low intensity exercise, probably want to do that 3-4 times a week.
Got it. And that you want to do for what, 40 minutes, an hour?
It seems to be 45 minutes, 4 times a week is the sweet spot.
Okay.
According to the research. And that doesn't have to be 4 sessions at 45 minutes. It could be 1 hour-and-a-half session and then 2 45-minute sessions. It could be 1 3-hour session. So apparently it's the volume, it's the 3 hours per week that is suggested for that long duration, low intensity type of exercise.
That's pretty good. 3 hours. I'm going to write that down. Because I want to make sure I get that. So how often should somebody do one of these tests, like a VO2 max? I mean, most people have never done it, unless you're an elite athlete, right? That's why I'd never done it.
You know, I found a study in preparation for this. I found a study from 2018 that is really the gold standard. It was done in 122,000 people.
Wow.
And they were able to take people in their 50s, so our cohort, right?
Okay.
And it wasn't just those people, but the chart, the part that I paid attention to was in the 50s. And they basically broke it down to, if you're low fitness, that means you were in the bottom 25% of that group. If you were below average, you were between 25 and 50%. If you were above average, you were 50 to 75%. And if you were high, you were 75 to 95%. And then there's elite, is the top 5%. And what they found is that basically each group had about 30,000 people in them, and then the elite group only had 3,500, right? So it just goes to show from a percentage standpoint who fits into that category. The biggest gap, in other words, where you got the greatest improvement, was going from low fitness, under 25%, to just being below average, 25 to 50%. That was the greatest improvement. What I mean by improvement is what's called all-cause mortality. And this is the longevity question, right? Because you've heard people say, we both have, VO2 max testing is the single best marker for longevity. And it really stems from studies like this. And what they say is that if you go from low to below average, which is not a big feat,
No.
if we tested somebody who was low, in the bottom 25%, and just brought them to 25 to 50%, they would have a 50% reduction over a decade in all-cause mortality, which is basically longevity. That's exactly what longevity means. What is your risk for all-cause mortality in a 10-year period? That's fascinating. And if you were to go from low to above average, to 60%, 70%, then you reduce it by 70%. You reduce your all-cause mortality. So I don't want to bore anyone with statistics, but here's where it gets very interesting. If you were a smoker at any time in your life, you have a 41% increase in your risk for all-cause mortality. If you have coronary artery disease, if you have heart disease, it's 29%. So smoking is worse than heart disease. Diabetes is 40%.
Wow.
High blood pressure is 21%. End stage kidney disease is 280%. Okay.
Wow.
All cause mortality. So end stage kidney disease. Now, just remember that 280% number, because if you improve and you go from low to above average, if you go from under 25% to above 50%, then you are going to improve by 275%.
Holy smokes.
It's just as good as not having
Kidney
end-stage kidney disease, right?
Wow.
So that right there, and the lowest gain is going from high to elite. Going from a high to elite, it's still statistically significant, meaning if you go from high to elite, you have an improvement of about 129%, but that's the lowest. So just going from low to below average, from low fitness to below average, if you go from 20% to 40%, it has the same benefit as quitting smoking.
Wow.
If you are low and you want to go to below average, which is not a big feat, and you don't do it, it's like not quitting smoking.
Right.
So I just wanted to frame that, Pete, with that.
Well,
that study.
it just shows you that the least fit, the most unhealthy people that are walking around on this planet, if they could just make some improvements, it really gives them a chance at longer life.
Right.
Basically, I mean, it's not going to be massive improvements. They don't have to become elite athletes by any stretch, but just by improving these things, it makes a huge impact on their longevity.
According to Medicare, if your VO2 max is, I believe, between 18 and 20, you're considered disabled. So if you go by the 10% per decade scale, if you're 55 years old and your VO2 max is, let's just say 30.
Okay.
And then you project yourself to 75, 80, or 85 years old, and you're not doing anything to improve your VO2 max, you can predict when you're going to become disabled, right?
Wow.
So you and I think we share the same goal. We would both like to hit, if we're blessed enough, to be fortunate enough to be 85, 90 years old, we'd like to have a VO2 max of 30, so we can just do all the things that we do, right?
Right. Right.
And I don't want to predict anything about how long anyone lives, because nobody knows that.
Absolutely. I mean, there's always, you can get by a bus tomorrow, but
Right.
the whole point is that the whole point of this podcast is removing limitations, right?
Right.
A
That's exactly right.
limitless life, a life with less limits. So I really love these metrics that we're talking about. So how much runway does somebody need to make improvement in their VO2 max? Like, what's the time frame? Like, if I said, you know what, this is really interesting to me, I want to get this test done, and I want to see, like, what's the window before I repeat it? Like, I follow all your advice to improve my VO2 max, and how long does it take?
You could see changes. So we suggest that this test be done after doing it the first time. We suggest it gets done 3 times in that first year.
Okay, so yeah, that's good.
Because you could see meaningful changes, and those changes come from your metabolic health. So, for example, adding some muscle and decreasing body fat dramatically improves your VO2 max, because that's less tissue. There's less fat, which has no metabolic value, and adding or not losing muscle, which has very high metabolic value. So when you change the ratio, your body composition, that can dramatically improve your VO2 max.
Okay.
And
So
then,
number
again,
one is body composition,
yeah.
right? And
Body
then,
composition makes a big difference.
yep. And then the next one would be what? Improving your zone 2 training?
Yeah. So, well, you'd want to improve strength
Okay.
while you're improving your zone 2.
Okay. So
If,
really the
if
combination.
Correct. If you had to choose because of time restrictions or personal restrictions or whatever it was, where are you going to get the most bang for your buck? Have some resistance exercise to maintain your muscle, because that is also something you can predict over time losing. So slowing that, and your muscle is your armor. Your muscle is what protects every joint you have in your body. Matter of fact, if you were to fall on your butt, it's good to have excuse my language, an ass there to cushion the blow, so you don't fracture a hip. You'd want to really take care of the biggest muscle groups you have in your body by giving them resistance, and then the zone 2.
Okay.
And the way I improve zone 2 for myself, because it's hard to do zone 2 if you're a runner, because if you're running outside, you're not going to stay in zone 2. You're going to fluctuate out of zone 2.
Sure.
So you'd have to kind of be indoors on a treadmill, like with very specific heart rate. Well, I found that if I'm rucking, if I have a weighted vest or a weighted plate on my back, let's just say 35, 45 pounds, I now can go for a nice walk and get my heart rate into my zone 2 with no problem, and I can track that on my watch.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, we talked about that on one of our previous podcasts about how rucking is actually the great equalizer in the military. They see that when you put a pack on somebody, if they're really heavy and out of shape, it gets them leaner and gets them in great shape. If somebody's skinny and weak, but they have good lungs, it gets them stronger. So it builds strength as well as it builds endurance and cardiovascular fitness. So it is the great equalizer. And we were really, I think, designed to carry weight for long distances. One of the only species on the planet that on our own can actually grab things, put them on our body and carry them, whereas other mammals have to have us strap them. They can only carry stuff with their mouth on their own. So
Correct.
It's pretty interesting.
Yeah. What I like to do is look at all of the assessments that can be done that are, available, inexpensive, but highly reliable based on decades of research. And I find there are 5 things that people can have checked. They can have their blood chemistry checked.
Yep.
They can have their VO2 and resting metabolic rate checked. They can have their body composition checked. What is your lean muscle mass compared to body fat compared to visceral fat? Have your strength tested, and then, of course, your ability to move, your flexibility, your range of motion of your joints. So those are the 5 assessments that I find, if you can improve each one of those, and they can easily be examined and tested in a clinical environment like your office or
those are solid metrics for sure. And it doesn't take an absolute rocket scientist to figure out whether you're winning or losing those games.
Right.
We all know, right? I mean, you can tell with what your strength is. You can tell with what you look like in the mirror when you look at your body composition and so forth. So those are awesome. So let's talk a little bit more about blood chemistry results. How do blood chemistry results compare as far as the data you get from blood chemistry results to the data you get from like a VO2 max test? How do they correlate? How do they cross over? Give me some insight there, please.
So if your blood chemistry shows that let's just say we're starting to see the beginnings of what we would call insulin resistance, and that's the most common thing that Americans find, right? As Americans, we're blessed enough to live in a country where we have a refrigerator and a pantry full of food, and it's very inexpensive. And therefore, we're more likely to have greater abundance of what's going in to what's being utilized. So we're out of energy balance just by virtue of being American, right? So what your blood work tells us is the early onset of those things. The late onset of those things is your glucose goes up and your hemoglobin A1C goes up. I say that's late because by the time you have like the very earliest stages of pre-diabetes, Your problem's been there for over 10 years. So when we do blood work and we look at other things like triglycerides starting to creep above 100, when we see liver enzymes starting to creep into the mid-20s, that's earlier signs at least, and fully reversible signs. And even somebody with frank type 2 diabetes can reverse that. And so when we look at blood work and see that there's already some kind of a poor fuel delivery, that's going to impact this test 100%. And that's just on the blood sugar side. Remember, fuel has two components, oxygen and glucose.
Yep.
So we can pretty much say, all right, well, my lungs are good, my heart is good, but what if I'm mildly anemic? What if I don't have enough of the ingredients to make healthy red blood cells that deliver oxygen? What if my B12 is low? What if my folate is low? What if my iron is not properly stored as ferritin so that I can constantly have a turnover of healthy red blood cells? Well, now the other half of the fuel equation is compromised. So there's oxygen and glucose, the two halves of the fuel equation, that we can look and find a wealth of information in your blood work. And then, of course, is inflammation, right? Inflammation is going to, because it taxes your energy systems. How your body uses energy is what we're measuring with this test. Well, when we take in food, we can burn it to create movement and heat. Part of the heat side of that is inflammation. So your ability to use your energy for movement and activities is going to be less if your inflammation is high. So you can see all the different categories of the blood work that we do are really impacted by this. And then, of course, the engine of the cell, the idle of that engine, is determined by thyroid hormone. So all of the markers that we're looking at on a routine blood test is going to impact this. And if we find that there's nutrient deficiencies, if there's inflammation, if there's insulin resistance, if there's any detoxification issues with your liver and your kidneys, this is going to negatively impact your scores.
Yeah. So the cool thing is that we did my blood chemistry right before this. So we have fresh results from my blood chemistry, and then we go see the performance that I did. And I think that's kind of the more interesting side of the podcast if people are still listening at this point, 30 minutes in. Let's talk about some of my results. I mean, I give you full HIPAA leeway here. So I signed the non-disclosure agreement. It's you can tell everybody about me.
Sure. You've been on a certain diet for the last 3 months, right? You've been on what we would call a carnivore diet.
Yeah, and we've talked about that on the podcast. Last week we hit it a little bit, and I spoke about it in January. My wife and I both have been carnivore. Yep.
And in the VO2 Max test, we actually pushed your body to go well into the sugar burning zone. And we know that you haven't had any, your diet has been 100% protein and fat. And therefore, where did this sugar come from that allowed you to get what we would consider to be a superior result on your VO2 Max test? Just so everybody knows, Dr. Pete got 50, which puts him in the elite zone of people in his age group, and actually in the very excellent zone for people 10, even 20 years younger than he is. So kudos to him because again, you can't fake that. So your blood work should tell us that you should have bonked out. You shouldn't have been able to go into that super maximum heart rate and maintain it for as long as you did without carbohydrate as fuel. Well, you had no carbohydrate as fuel, but you're able to manufacture what you need. So we always say that as we get older, our ability to manage the carbohydrates in our diet goes down. We become more insulin resistant. I think the older we get, the fewer carbs we should have. Do they need to go carnivore? That's for every individual to decide for themselves. And you didn't need to do that. You chose to do that. Well, the benefit I think you got is you're very fat adapted. You can mobilize your body fat in a way that you can produce not only the fat you need for the low end of the energy equation, right? The long duration, low intensity exercise is very high fat burning, whereas the very high intensity is very sugar burning, which means you're able to just take that fat, pull the glycerol molecule off, shuttle it into your cell, into your liver, and make sugar out of it. So that's remarkable, because every clinical dietitian would tell you that, oh no, you better have enough glycogen, you better have enough sugar stored in your system to meet the demands of this high intensity activity, yet you were able to meet those demands with no problem.
And I mean, every dietitian pretty much recommends that you have fruits and vegetables, so many servings, so many colors, all that stuff. I mean, I haven't had a vegetable in I don't know how long, and or a piece of fruit. Yeah. So, and my cholesterol's through the roof on my blood work.
Yes, we're very proud of that.
Which I think this is, again, I try to explain this to people, that cholesterol is not the enemy here. So I want you to be another person to explain this to people, because this is such a misnomer in medical health today, is thinking that high cholesterol is a problem. And I don't think it always is a problem. And in most cases, it's not the enemy. It's actually just something that's involved in the process. Go ahead.
The only thing that I'll disagree with is that in most cases, it's not the enemy. I would say in most cases, it is the enemy, because people have insulin resistance, high carbohydrate in their system, while this fat is just circulating, waiting to be used, but never used. So what happens?
But isn't that the real enemy? The insulin resistance and the poor
Absolutely.
blood sugar control. Yeah.
Correct. But ultimately, LDL cholesterol is what's going to wind up in the blood vessels, causing what we call heart disease. Or I shouldn't say causing, what I should say
is part
is
of it.
That's what is narrowing the vessel, so to speak, and creating the damage.
It's the material.
It's the material.
It's the material
spackle.
well, that's the thing. If you look at it, it's like if somebody's going to put spackle on the wall, they have to have the joint compound, right? That's that stuff. But what's doing the spackling, right? That's, to me, that's what's causing what's putting the holes in the wall that's requiring the spackling. So what's creating the damage in the blood vessel wall that is requiring this stuff to be applied to it.
There was years ago there was a lot of attention being paid to the size of your cholesterol, like small, medium, and large, and the small ones go into the blood vessels and cause more damage. If you have high, small amount, the problem with that is those are man-made delineations
parameters
that don't exist in nature. So what we're finding with you is that your cholesterol has to go up, because remember, oil and water don't mix, fat and water don't mix. If you want to traffic something around your body to deliver, it needs a vehicle. That vehicle is a protein called lipoprotein, and there's two types, LDL and HDL. So the LDL takes your fat, which we know that's your fuel source. That's what you use for fuel. You need to traffic your fat around your body to deliver to your muscles to use as energy. So that has to be LDL cholesterol. So in order for you to meet your energy needs, you have to raise your LDL cholesterol. If your energy needs
something's going on with the recording, Dr. G. I don't know if your internet has changed, but your screen is going blurry, and your voice is off a bit. So I don't know if something changed on your end.
Is it still like that? Is it still, I have, for the money I pay for this Wi-Fi service, there should be no problem.
Yeah, I'm unfortunate, because I know what you were explaining was really important. I really don't want to stop the podcast at this point because of technology.
Is it coming back?
But I know that what you're talking about is the ability to transmit energy through the body or traffic. The energy through my body has to be done through these molecules, and yeah, that's what you were getting
Well,
at
it's
there.
being done through fat. It's being done through fat, and fat requires a vehicle, and that vehicle is LDL cholesterol. So the question is, how long is your cholesterol being trafficked? It's called residence time. And people with heart disease have very high residence times because it's just circulating around the body and not doing anything. It has more time to go into the blood vessel wall and cause problems. Whereas with you, that's not the case. As a matter of fact, I would imagine your LDL cholesterol can fluctuate very dramatically.
Yeah, we're getting about every other word from you, Dr. G. Unfortunately, something's gone wrong with your internet on your end, I believe.
How do I know if it's on my end?
Do you? Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at your upload speed is on my end. I can see it's down to 94%, where mine is staying at 99%. For some reason, there's a processing issue with the internet right now. So I don't know if it's on your end, my end, but unfortunately, it's content that's not digestible for a listener right now. I think what we'll have to do is probably cut the podcast short right here. I know this is twice as long as what we normally go, and we were just getting into some of the great content with regard to this. So I apologize to the listeners. Dr. G, I wish your upload speed for some reason, I don't know if it's on your end or my end, but for some reason it's no longer. Can you say anything on your end?
Hold on one second. I'm just doing.
Got your voice back.
Am I back?
I got your voice. Your video's not so great, but your voice is better.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah. So, yeah, it sounds better.
And what about the video?
I'm not worried about the video. I'm more concerned about your voice, but the video is still a little blurry. What do you think?
Give me 1 second. I'm just going to shut down a bunch of stuff here.
Well, maybe that'll help. Well, I appreciate you taking the time out of your day. I know you got a lot of things on your plate today.
Can you hear me pretty clearly now?
Perfect. Yeah, you sound better. Your upload speed is up to 98%, so it looks good.
All right. So what
Yeah,
I
we're
can
talking
do
about
is
trafficking fat through cholesterol. Let's move on, though, to more of the results of the VO2 Max test. So what did my results show? Obviously, you said I got a really good score, but what else did you learn from your data?
Well, what was interesting is again from your diet. So we did your son as well, Dr. Nate. He has not been on the kind of diet that you're on, and Dr. Nate definitely is a very strong young man. He's half our age, more than half our age, and his carbohydrate and fat burning capacity was 50-50. He was manufacturing 50% of his energy was coming from carbohydrate and 50% was coming from fat. With you, it was 90 and 10. So,
Wow.
so that really is reflective of the diet that you've been on. And we also did a resting metabolic rate, which means we had you just lay there for 10 minutes beforehand to kind of find out what your resting metabolic rate is. And this is important for all of us too, because if you're ever thinking about, not that you would, but any kind of a weight loss program or fat loss program where you want to minimize how much muscle you're losing, well, what we do with the resting metabolic rate is we got a sense of how many calories you would need in a day, and then how many calories you would need in an active day. And not that we want people to count calories, but energy balance is important for people who are looking to lose weight. When it comes to weight loss, there's two things to consider: insulin resistance and energy balance. If you are taking in more than you're burning, well, then there's a problem. But if you're unable to burn fat as opposed to sugar, that's also a problem, and that goes to the insulin story. So this kind of a test can give us, this is why The Biggest Loser has no reunion episodes, right? Because you gain all of your weight back, because what happens is 40% of your weight loss is loss of muscle. Your metabolic rate goes down. Even if you don't go back to a terrible diet, you gain all of your weight back. And when somebody's over 35 years old, we want to have a resting metabolic rate so we can better understand what their needs are to hold on to their muscle and lose body fat.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, so that was an eye-opening thing. One of the other things that you picked up on my result had to do with my recovery.
So one of the things that we measure, and the only thing that really came up not great on yours, is that recovery. So again, you were able to push yourself to your maximum. We saw that because everything was at 100%. And then when you did stop the test, we measure how fast your heart rate comes down, as well as how fast your volume of CO2 production goes down. And that rate was slower than what would have been predicted. So that needs to improve, and the way to improve that is by improving the base of your pyramid. So your pyramid, just imagine this, has a super high peak but not a wide enough base. If you let the peak even come down a little bit and widen your base, you'll still have the same VO2 max, but your recovery would improve.
Yeah.
So that, again, it goes to, and you and I grew up in a time where we're like, well, if we're going to work out, let's hit it hard, right? And zone 2 is really deceiving because it feels like you're not doing a whole lot. And I'm asking people to do 3 hours a week of something that doesn't feel, and if you put that kind of, I make fun of golfers all the time. I'm like, yeah, I love the sport of golf, but my goodness, that much time in the sun and I'm not getting a workout in, like that's just a colossal waste of time. So if golf were zone 2, it would be perfect. Maybe a good way to make golf zone 2 is to put the 35 pounds on your back.
Right. That's called your clubs, I think.
Right.
I don't think anybody carries their clubs anymore. I think they have
Correct.
carts, or they drag them with these remote carts. I don't know, or they push
Correct.
them. I don't know. I haven't golfed in years, but yeah, that was pretty interesting. So I learned like what I need for calorie intake to maintain my body, so I don't, gain weight, and so I don't lose muscle mass. That was an important piece of information. I learned what my maximum heart rate was, but the other thing that I found was really interesting was what my zone 2 actually was. Because my zone 2, what I thought it was before, based on taking 220 and subtracting my age to gain my maximum heart rate, that's kind of a generic way to do it. And then looking where you fall on the chart for zone 2, I always thought my zone 2 was between like 115 and 130, but this result said that my zone 2 is between 100 and 130. So I had a wider range for zone 2 than I thought. And then you told me my crossover was at 118. So what does that mean, crossover?
So that's a great question. So if you're just going to be in zone 1, you could taking your dog for a walk or doing cooking around the house, you're only burning fat. Pretty much it's just fat, right? Because you can only store so much sugar, and it's valuable, so you don't want to waste it. So we all can store a lot more fat than we can store in sugar, so we use that as our fuel. But zone 1 isn't exactly high volume fat burning, so you're not going to lose weight just walking around. When you're in zone 2, it's the maximum amount of fat burn you can have. So for you, 117 is your optimal heart rate for fat burning. As soon as you cross over, once you hit 118 and higher, then you're starting to manufacture more sugar, and your percentage of fat that you're burning in your exercise goes down.
Got it.
Now, technically, your zone 2 is between 100 and 130, and that's very good. And what's interesting is that those charts, the 220 minus your age times 80% or whatever, those are based on elite athletes. They're not based on the general public. So you actually being between 115 and 130 on that calculation, and then actually being between 100 and 130 tells me that you more accurately fit into that category, because the 117 mark is your crossover.
Okay.
But the average Joe would overestimate their zone 2 by far too much.
Okay. Very, very interesting. I'm excited to actually try this again in maybe 4 to 6 months to see if I can make sure. I'm going to do it. I'm going to go out and do that. But the other thing I guess I got to bring up in this whole thing is that I don't think my results would have been nearly this good if I was not on a carnivore diet for the last 90 days. I've been talking about this over and over again on the podcast, I guess, because not only do I feel better, but my blood scores, my inflammatory markers are way, way down. And from a performance standpoint, I mean, I feel functionally strong. And I mean, I just did a workout today, a strength training workout today, and I was very pleased with how great I felt. So I'm very just grateful that I've stumbled upon doing a carnivore diet. It was really my wife's idea.
You know, it's interesting, too, because you took the time to become fat adapted. You were probably already more than halfway fat adapted when you started, because you lived more of a paleo lifestyle, for lack of a better term. But that for somebody to go carnivore and then do this test after just 4 weeks is probably not a good idea. Because it takes more time to become fat adapted.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was 90 days plus into the carnivore diet. And I guess I'm looking at like that whole crossover thing and thinking about, like, say, my son who's 50-50 with his fat burning and sugar, like his ability to burn fat even at zone 2 is not going to be as efficient, correct?
It's not going to be as efficient for himself as a leaner version of himself.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. We can't compare him to you because he's 24.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's what I mean. But if he was fat adapted, he would be more likely to burn fat.
Oh my goodness, yeah. Which is part of the reason why your heart rate during the test, you were able to, so just for the listener, every minute we increased the intensity and looked for a greater demand for the heart rate to go up. Well, there were several minutes that had gone by where Dr. Pete really stayed between the 155 to 160 mark on his heart rate. And even though we were increasing the intensity by wattage pretty significantly, and that's because when you're that efficient at utilizing fat for fuel, which is a very fuel efficient way of doing it, think about glucose or sugar as being like high octane fuel. You burn it fast. Whereas fat is not as high octane, it burns more slowly. So you could bring your heart rate to that high level and stay there and increase your power while not raising your need for your heart rate to go up. So that goes to you being fat adapted. Whereas your son was much more linear in his ascent, even though he could raise his heart rate because of his age far higher.
And he's way stronger. I mean, but he pulled on the rower, you knew it. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I was very impressed with the whole testing system, but the data is really got my wheels spinning as to what to do. But we talked a little bit about mitochondria and increasing the mitochondria. Can you go into that a little bit?
Sure. So think of mitochondria as the engine, right? So if every muscle cell you have is a vehicle, like an automobile, and every automobile has an engine, just imagine your muscle has a muscle cell has 10 engines. Mm-hmm. And then you feed it that fuel and the 10 engines fire and the muscles contract and move you around so you can walk your dog and cook your meals and go shopping. Right. But now you want to do more than that. You want to train yourself to be far more efficient. So what you have to do is this zone 2 fat burning, which is very dependent on those engines. And then what happens is your body will innately start manufacturing more engines per cell. So now, instead of 10 engines per cell, and again, I'm just making the numbers up, you could go to 100 engines per cell, which means you're going to burn more fat and better consume oxygen over time, and that will prevent you from losing muscle as you age. So this is how we can not only prevent the decline in our VO2 max by 10% per decade, we can prevent the decline of muscle loss because we have more engines burning more fuel, allowing us to eat more and not suffer the consequences of eating more.
Yeah, that's super cool. Yeah, very excited about that. Yeah, I don't really have any more questions that I can think of to try to stump you. No, I wasn't going to try to stump you, but I think our listeners got a ton to learn about this here. What do you think would be the first place people should start to go with this? What should they do? Now, I just listened to this podcast. Now, what do I do with it? What would you say to them?
Again, it depends if let's just say you're a beginner.
Yep.
You've done nothing in the last year to improve your fitness or your diet. I would say the first thing you do is just make a commitment to doing 30 minutes of a long duration, low intensity type of exercise. That could mean just getting your heart rate. So a good calculation for the average bear is 180 minus your age, okay? And then subtract 10 beats from that. So if you're 50 years old, 180 minus your age is 130. 120 is your zone 2 max
range.
Like don't go
that's
above
pretty
that.
good.
So 110 to 120, keep your heart rate there. You could go to goruck.com or pick up something heavy and go for a walk. Or you may not have to. You may find yourself getting to that heart rate just walking on an incline on your treadmill. So do that 30 minutes 3 times a week and build up to the 3 hours a week. Start with an hour and a half a week, build up to the 3 hours. That's for exercise and fitness. And then go on a low carbohydrate type of diet, which means if it looks the way it did when it walked on the ground, swam in the ocean, growing out of the ground, fruits, vegetables, healthy meats, eggs, like what we would call a paleo-style diet is really, compared to other people, a low carbohydrate diet. That'll get your insulin down, which would help you use fat as fuel rather than trying to constantly search for sugar for fuel. If you go to a HIIT class, if you think you're going to go to a gym and join a HIIT class and do a 30-minute boot camp 5 days a week, that's going to contribute nothing to improving, not nothing, I shouldn't say that. That's not going to contribute to your longevity, staying injury-free, and accomplishing your goals as quickly as possible. You're better off with a zone 2 type of exercise with a paleo-style low-carbohydrate diet. That's probably the best place to start. And then get your blood work done and get assessed by a team like they have at Lombardi Chiropractic to, make sure that things are working properly.
Yeah. Great stuff, Dr. G. I really thank you from the bottom of my heart coming on today. I think we really covered this very thoroughly, and I know our listeners are going to get a lot out of it. Unfortunately, having that little technical glitch there, but to finish up, your picture looks great now. You're uploading at 99%, so that's a great way to end the podcast with a good-looking shot of Dr. G. All right, so that's all we have for this week's edition of your weekly Limitless Life Network podcast. Be sure to stay tuned each and every week to stay connected, be inspired, and keep moving toward your best life by stripping away your limitations. And we'll see you all back next week. Thanks, Dr. G.